And welcome to another episode of Inside the Toon, a deep dive into all things Newcastle United. I'm Olly Clink. I'm alongside Newcastle fan and journalist Jack Cunningham. Jack, we are reacting to a 2-0 loss in the semi-final first leg to Manchester City. Very disappointing result. What's your overriding emotion after watching that game last night?
Frustrated because I don't think Manchester City were that good, and I also thought Newcastle played pretty well. I saw some reaction at a few places suggesting that it was a really poor performance, and I would disagree with that. To be fair, I don't think it was. Thought there was a lot of players who played well, and we can touch on them individually in a bit. Just missed some massive chances, really huge opportunities, like 4 big chances in the game. There's not many teams who create that many opportunities like that against Manchester City. I mean, even if you think about the game in the league, we probably had 1 big chance, which was the Harvey Barnes goal, because his other goal was from the edge of the box, so I wouldn't say that was a big chance. So it's just a lack of clinical finishing, I think, and ultimately now we go to the Etihad, where I knew the record was bad, but I actually had a look, and we've won there once, which was in the League Cup, so you never know, 1-2-0. But
Rolando Aarons, wasn't it?
But yeah, it was, yeah, and Sissoko. But apart from that, we've never, ever beaten, even when they were rubbish and the takeover hadn't happened, we couldn't beat them at the Etihad. So the last time we won another game other than that League Cup was at Main Road in 2000 or something. So in terms of grounds that we don't do well at, that is up there.
I think the most gutting thing as well really was that second goal with about 30 seconds left, very, very deep into 9 minutes added on, because, it was looking like an uphill task anyway at 1-0 down. I felt that was a game that Newcastle had to win to stand a chance of going through, just because of that record that you talk about at the Etihad, and the fact that Man City are a brilliant side, and the fact that the next game is a month away, so they might have a few of their fitter players back by then as well. But that second goal all but kind of kills it, doesn't it? I mean, it's going to take probably the best performance of the Eddie Howe era to try and get through to that final. I mean, he tried to stay upbeat after the game, didn't he, Eddie Howe? He said there's still a chance. He did reference the Arsenal game as well, from last season, where they did go to the Emirates and win 2-0. But do you feel like it is a bit of wishful thinking, really, that Newcastle are going to make it through?
The only way Newcastle have a chance is if we score the next goal in the tie. If we go to the Etihad and we get an early goal in the tie and you make it 2-1, then suddenly there is potentially something there for us to work with and build on and cling on. However, I do feel like, because, as you say, it's about 3 weeks away or whatever it is, I can't see Manchester City going into that game with the same back four that they had last night. I think they would have made signings. I'd hope we would have made signings as well. But equally, it does feel like it's going to be an uphill struggle, and if City get an early goal, then that is the end of it, and I'm sure that's exactly how Pep Guardiola will be sending the team out when we play them, a sense of just get an early goal, that is the tie over, and our defence of the Carabao Cup will be finished, unfortunately. It'll be amazing to think we could turn it around and get back to Wembley. It's just feeling like, if anything, it's more hope than any sort of realism around it, to be brutally honest.
Yeah, and if you look at the game itself, you mentioned obviously the big chances that Newcastle had. They had 4 and didn't take any, and Manchester City had 2 and took both of them, which kind of tells the story of the game in a lot of ways. And I feel that as much as there were some good performances, particularly the likes of Lewis Hall, I thought he was absolutely magnificent last night. But it was the other end of the pitch, wasn't it, that really let Newcastle down. And I thought that the Yohan Wissa really struggled last night. Whether it's him, that you've got to remember that he's just coming back from injury, but it just didn't quite seem the level. And I think it's that miss really early on in the game that kind of sets the tone, because if he puts that in the back of the net, Jack, in the first 4 minutes or so, gets the crowd on side, it's a totally different game. And I feel that out of all the chances missed last night, that was the most frustrating.
Yeah, I agree. I thought, brilliant cross by Jacob Murphy. It is what he does, isn't it? He puts things on a plate. You can criticise other parts of his game, but you cannot criticise his crossing ability. It's absolutely top draw. Puts it on a plate for Visser. The first touch is decent, and then he doesn't even hit the target from 8 yards out. You know, you've got to at least work the goalkeeper with that one. As you say, 4 minutes in, we score that, and St James's Park is alive. We're 1-0 up, and I think there's suddenly a huge belief that we can actually do this and make it to another final. I thought Visser's overall game was really poor. Thought his link-up wasn't there whatsoever. Every time it came into him, he seemed to be desperate to lay it off first time rather than maybe take a touch, look around, see who's there, and find a black and white shirt. He was a bit unlucky with his header in the second half. That was a good looping header that James Trafford tipped onto the crossbar. Did well with that one. But yeah, he just wasn't at the level. And I thought after a really lively start for Visser, where he looked match fit in those first couple of games, like against Fulham and Burnley, I think he's dropped off just a little bit. And unfortunately, it's not his fault necessarily with the price tag. But we have spent £55 million on a 29-year-old man. We need him to we need him to hit the ground running. We need him to do well. We need him to deliver right now, and he's not doing it. And then I thought Voldemar was poor when he came on as well, to be honest. I mean, great cross from Harvey Barnes into him. It looks like he's totally unmarked for some reason, and it just like he didn't react to the header in time. I think if he reads it a little bit quicker, he scores. I don't think there's even any question about it. He scores, because from that range, all you need is some contact on the header and it goes in. And then we've always praised his hold-up play, Waldemar, and rightly so. And I still think he has been a great signing for Newcastle. But I have been concerned in the last few weeks, and it feels as if maybe everything's catching up with him a little bit. The amount of games he's had to play catching up with him a little bit. And I feel like he's getting knocked off the ball too easily, and he wasn't at the start of the season, but he is a bit now. Like I felt like there was a few times yesterday where it came into him at the start of the year, he'd be holding that up, and he wasn't. He was getting knocked off it, and City were breaking from there. And then also that one where Barnes played it to him, and he didn't take it first time, and he took a touch and then tried to lay it off. I don't know what that was.
That was so frustrating. That was so frustrating. Just have a shot, and
just have a shot.
It's right there to be hit. And he decides to take a touch, and the chance kind of goes begging. And it kind of felt like it summed up the night for both of those strikers. It's interesting you mentioned Johan Wisser's price tag, because, you know, we saw most of the players that Newcastle bought in the summer last night. Elanga came on as well. Jacob Ramsey also started. How do you feel now, given that we are in January and for the most part, we've seen, you know, a fair amount of those players, albeit, you know, obviously Johan Wisser has been injured for a lot of that time. 145 million odd that Newcastle spent on those players. How do you feel about that business at the moment?
Yeah, it's starting to feel as if these might be our first few misses in the transfer market, which at the time of selling Alexander Isak isn't ideal, really, because that's when we've had the most money to spend. Now, I'm going to defend Jacob Ramsey because I am a huge fan of his. I know we haven't seen maybe the goals or assists that we saw at Aston Villa, but I think it's because he's playing in a different role. He's playing much deeper. I thought last night he was very good. I thought under pressure he was excellent on the ball. I thought his passing was top drawer. But I thought, crucially, the midfield looks much more solid with him in it. And I just feel as if Ramsey is starting to show signs. Elanga is a huge concern, and I'm sure Adam Cleary better get into it probably with us on Friday with stats, etc. Because I'm just going to leave him to do this. I'm going to do the eye test. And the guy looks so short of confidence. He can't do the basics right. There was one point actually where Joe Linton switched the ball out to him and he brought it down brilliantly. And then he moved inside and he played it out wide. And then he went for the return pass and he's in on goal. And his first touch goes out for a goal kick. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I could control that pass. It wasn't a difficult pass to control.
Well, I don't know about that, Jack.
Well, no, right? Yes, you've never even seen me play football and you don't want to. You are starting to worry about him a lot because I just want him to, even if he's not going to score goals, I just want him to take on his man and use his pace and try and get past me and whip the ball in the box. Just do that. I think he just needs to do that. Get back to
It's been
basics.
really disappointing though, hasn't
Yeah.
it? I think especially because for so long, right wing was a massive target in the transfer
Yeah.
market, and for me, it still feels like Jacob Murphy is the stronger right winger. It's nothing against Jacob Murphy, but when you've been waiting so long for that position to be strengthened, this has been a really disappointing transfer so far. To be fair, and I'll try and spin it with some kind of positivity. You look at some of the other players that Newcastle brought in, even Lewis Hall, who we've already mentioned. You could maybe argue Anthony Gordon. Now, I don't think either of those were kind of showing as poor a form as
No.
Alanga is, but they have eventually come good. I think especially in Lewis Hall's case, if we're talking at the first 6 months of his time here, did we really think that we'd be sitting here after a cup semi-final against Man City and saying that he was the best player on the pitch, and his performances actually have been so consistent? Sometimes it will take a bit of time. It's just the strange thing with Alanga is you were taking him from Forest, where he'd had a really good season. Lewis Hall you could see was a player that needed a bit of developing. So that's where the kind of worry lies for me. And I think you are right, Jack, as well. I do think it's a huge confidence problem for Anthony Alanga. You'd hope that maybe it takes a couple of goals, a couple of assists for him to kind of get going. But at the moment, I'm not quite sure where those moments are going to come from. Listen, I mean, as much as it feels like this tie's over, Newcastle are still in the Carabao Cup. They are, of course, still the holders as well until the team wins it
Until that other game, yeah.
March the 22nd as well. So listen, there are certain things that we can spin quite positively. Let's talk about Lewis Hall though last night, because I just thought going forward he was immense. At the back he was immense. He's such a difficult defender to take on one-on-one. You noticed it in the first half where as much as Antoine Semenyo ended up having the impact on the game, he just couldn't make anything happen. It's not the first time, is it, that we've seen Lewis Hall mark a brilliant player out of the game?
Yeah, I'll go back to last season, Arsenal at home in the league, where he was against Bukayo Saka, totally just nullified Saka. And Semenyo is explosive, down the right, down the left. We saw last season in the game they beat us 4-1, Bournemouth, and he destroyed Tino Livramento. And you do not see many players doing that. In fact, I don't see any wingers doing that to Tino Livramento, but he did. And Hall last night dealt with Semenyo extremely well. And if you go back to the Dortmund game where he got hooked at half time, and he looked like a little boy, really. And it was like, this guy, we're going to probably be waiting a while to see Lewis Hall become something. But no, he is, I've said it before, there is no question in my mind, he is England's left back. You can forget Miles Lewis-Skelly. I'm not having any of this nonsense from Arsenal fans or anyone else who thinks that he's better than Lewis Hall. He isn't. He can't do half the things that Lewis Hall can do. And I get the sentiment of Miles Lewis-Skelly last season. Thought he came through, looked really good, and good breakthrough season for him. But Hall is better on the ball. He is better defensively. He was the man of the match by a long way. And let's also forget, Semenyo shouldn't have been playing anyway because they changed the rules. So,
What do you make of that, by the way? Only because Eddie Howe was asked about it after the game, and he said, the rules change, can't really do anything about that. You do think about the fact that Newcastle were a team impacted before the rule change, weren't they? Because Martin de Bradford couldn't play in the cup final against Manchester United. To be fair, there's been another couple of players I think who have benefited from that rule. One of them being Mark Guiu from Chelsea, who played for Sunderland, so he can still play for Chelsea if they want to play him in the semi-final bit. It does just seem quite frustrating that the rule has changed so that a player can play for two different clubs during a Carabao Cup campaign.
No, I don't. Look, I don't think the rules should have changed. Of course, you could argue I'm going to say that now because Semenyo scored, but equally, I think that's kind of the point of signing a player in January. That they can't play in that competition if you're still in that competition because that's just the way it works. So I feel as if that shouldn't have been changed. Also, they would have been able to play Max Allen either last night because he played for Watford. So
That's
who would
the
they?
thing.
Who would
It
they've actually
benefits the
played?
bigger clubs. It benefits the bigger clubs for sure, doesn't it?
It definitely does.
With
Yeah,
the deeper squads,
yeah, it does. Look,
and if they're able to do the business in January, yeah.
exactly. Like
It's a bit
Semenyo, the
frustrating.
Man City just spent £65 million on Antoine Semenyo. Antoine Semenyo
True.
was a player I've loved, and I said a few times last season that I think Newcastle should be all over him in the summer. In the end, of course, he signed a new contract, and we weren't in for him. And then when it came to January, I don't think we're even in the conversation for him,
Mhm.
and that's a shame. But equally, understand it. And like,
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's
he
not
should
that
have been
we're
able to.
bitter, by the way.
What?
It's not that. It's not that we're bitter about it.
No,
Of
not bitter
course.
at all.
Yeah,
No,
nah,
it's not bitter at
nah,
all.
fine.
No.
No, good luck to him. Good luck to him.
Yeah,
But,
good luck. I hope he does really well. Yeah.
I think that's great. Anyway, I mean, Jack, you have already mentioned, of course, a couple of times, whether Newcastle are going to do any January business. We are midway through the month as well. To ease some of our transfer worries as well, because there has been a bit of talk about who might be eyeing the exit. There was a couple of rumours for some reason, despite the fact that news about a new contract came out recently, that Sandro Tonali might be a player that has his head turned. So to ease some of those worries and to maybe look at who Newcastle might bring in, our colleagues over at the Window podcast asked talkSPORT reporter Ben Jacobs for the latest on Newcastle's transfer window.
With Sandro Tonali, we heard reports during his ban that a return to Italy was on the cards. I can tell you as well that Real Madrid really liked the player too. But let's not forget, Tonali very discreetly in around October last year extended his contract at Newcastle United. And at the moment, the Newcastle position under relatively new sporting director Ross Wilson is clear. They don't want to engage for offers for Sandro Tonali. And Tonali, I'm told, is deeply appreciative of how Newcastle handled the situation when he was suspended for those breaches of the FA's gambling rules. So this doesn't feel like a hot topic for January. And because he's so well contracted, Newcastle will hold all of the cards. So yes, there's interest from top European clubs. Bayern have made an inquiry. Italian clubs are interested. Real Madrid somewhat have Tonali on their radar, but there's been nothing yet direct with Newcastle United. And all signs are the player's not agitating to move. So it's one to keep an eye on across the summer, but it wouldn't surprise me if Newcastle, in a position of relative power, insists that Tonali stays. And from Tonali's point of view, I think if that's the club position, it's perhaps less likely we're going to get an Alexander Isak situation brewing where the player with an element of acrimony tries to force his way out of the football club because he's aware that this Newcastle project is building. And as I say, he's highly appreciative of how Newcastle United dealt with him when he was sidelined. And that was also why all parties decided to extend the contract. And now I believe, as of October last year, he's contracted until 2030.
There we go. So it doesn't really seem, Jack, fortunately, as if Sandro Tonali, at least in this January window, is going to be having his head turned, and it feels like the club are in a very strong position in that sense. In terms of incomings, it's centre-backs that they are looking at, and given the defensive crisis, it's hardly surprising, is it?
No, it's not a surprise that centre-backs are the ones who we are looking at. Like, you have Fabian Schär, who looks like he's been out for 3 months, I saw, which, you're coming towards, potentially, he's probably played one of his last games for Newcastle, which is a real shame. What an absolute legend of the club. But yeah, Schär. Burns not getting any younger. Botman has signed a new contract, which is great. And I thought Botman was actually really good against City. I was really happy with his performance. Rock solid. Looked like back to the Sven Botman that we all know and love. So I think centre-backs are an amazing chat. I saw a link with Giorgio Scalvini. We have clearly scouted him for a while. He's a very good footballer. However, his injury record, oh my God. I mean, it's like 16 separate injuries or something, and the guy's got 8 caps for Italy. He's barely turned 21. So if that is the choice, they do go for Scalvini. Just got to hope that he stays fit, because we can't have another injury-prone defender.
Yeah, I think especially when you think about the fact that at the moment they are 6th in the Premier League. They are still in the Carabao Cup, albeit 2-0 down in the first leg of the semi-final. They're through in the FA Cup, albeit with a difficult tie against Villa. They're still in the Champions League, hopefully getting through to the knockout phases. There's plenty this season still to play for, despite the fact that it has been very up and down and very frustrating at times this season. At the moment, on paper, they find themselves in a decent position. I agree with you that they need to think about some sort of investment, and especially in that back line due to circumstance. They've got to look at some of those short-term options. And you mentioned the injury issues and that some of the players are injury prone. Livramento's out for another 8 weeks. Another huge frustration, because we know how brilliant he can be, and the fact that we've got England's future fullbacks there,
Yes.
Livramento and Lewis Hall, of course. Now, you've already said, Jack, on Friday we are going to be bringing out another episode of Inside the Toon. Adam Cleary from the Adam Cleary Football Podcast will be with us. Big Newcastle fan, big on his tactics. He'll be able to break down with us where things are going slightly wrong for Newcastle at the moment, and especially for those new signings as well. We'll get stuck into that with Adam a bit later. There's plenty more for us to chat about as well. We'll talk about Sven Botman's new contract. We'll talk about the fact that Newcastle at the moment seem like they have the worst fixture list, especially away from home, in the history of football. So plenty to look forward to with that. We'll chat about the form of Harvey Barnes as well, and we'll get stuck into all of those brand new transfers. The other big piece of news that we are going to explore on Friday is the new plans that have been announced for a training ground, a new £200 million complex. They are the reports. Very, very exciting news. Shows that there is still plenty of interest in this project at Newcastle United. Jack, thank you very much indeed, mate.